Hello, this is Nina. Welcome back to NV Fine Art Studio. The most of you know, last week I had a very busy week. A demonstration by Amanda Hayat and a 2-day workshop with Alvaro Castanier. The approach to watercolor painting is very similar. They're both tonal painters. Tonal values are the biggest struggle for many, so I'm thinking it would be a good idea to focus on tones today and paint using Alvaro's and Amanda's techniques. I probably shouldn't say the techniques. The watercolor techniques are all the same for everyone. So let's focus on the way Alvaro and Amanda prioritize tones and shapes in their paintings. I decided to choose this street scene. It looks complex, but in reality, if you only think about tones and shapes, it is quite simple, and I will show you why. Firstly, in terms of tones, it has very clear 3 tonal values: the lightest, middle value, and darks. And secondly, it has strong, large shapes. Perfect for me to demonstrate you Alvaro's maximum impact, or as he likes to say, paint the line, not a cat technique. Let's begin with the sketch and talk about simplification. Today I will be painting on Bao Hong watercolor paper 300 GSM cold press or medium grain, and this is a quarter sheet. I'm not going to pre-wet the back of the paper today because there will be not too much wet on wet during the first wash. So straight to taping the paper to the board, and I'm using general purpose masking tape, and it's approximately 2.8 centimeters wide or approximately 1 inch. To do this sketch, I will use 4B graphite pencil and kneadable eraser. I would generally recommend a softer pencil such as 2B and above, as it damages the paper less and is easier to erase. I usually start the sketch with the line that divides earth and sky, but this image is vertical and my paper is a horizontal orientation. I want to change the width of the buildings on the left and right. They are currently almost not there. So let's quickly indicate the width of the building on the left first, just to see the proportions, and then proceed to the almost horizon line. It's not actually horizon line, but let's call it the horizon line. Next, I'm going to indicate the entrance into the theater. We don't need any details in there because it will be quite dark. Next, the main facade. Okay, that's the building, and now we need to indicate the number of floors. There are 3 of them, so that's that. There is quite a bit of details on the facade, and to eliminate all of this, I squint my eyes, and the only thing I see is the arch, the big arch in the middle at the top, and the dark shadows on the windows and columns as well. So that's pretty much the only things I need to indicate. And if you think it's not enough, it will be, definitely will be, because by the time we add all the little shadows, all the little windows, and a few shadows on the columns and on the windows as well, it will already look quite busy. Okay, so let's do the windows. The first one is actually the window, but this one isn't, but I'm just gonna pretend that it is, same as with this one, and that's the window as well. Okay, the first window is a bit too narrow, so let's make it wider, like that. That's better. Okay, let's continue with the lower floors. There are a few columns here, so I'm gonna indicate them and a few windows in between. Then we have these wide windows, so they're approximately at this height, something like that. Okay, that's good enough. And then 2 columns over here and a few windows. Okay, that's done. Again, on the left hand side there is a big, I'm not sure if it's a shop window or it's a big door, it doesn't really matter. There is a big dark square shape. That's it, that's done. And there is a public light over here, approximately this, that's the height, and then wires going in different directions. So this is actually it for the building. This is all we need to successfully suggest that this is an 18th century theatre. The most important part will be the interplay of light and shadow, and not the perfectly sketched columns or balustrade or any other parts of this architecture. Theoretically, you don't need to spend more than 5 to 10 minutes on the sketch. If you spend more, it means you're putting too many details and too carefully. This will definitely prevent you from being loose and expressive when you start painting. Okay, now I'm adding the people and the cars to the painting. I know the cars are sideways, but I don't like this view of the cars, so I'm just going to pretend they are parked facing the theatre. I have a few people, and they are slightly higher than the cars, so the shoulder is at the car's roof level. The position of the people is intentional. I want them to be in the most contrasting area. They will be just black silhouettes against the almost white paper. This guy actually will be almost in the shadow, and this one as well, and there will be only highlights on their heads and shoulders. I'm adding 2 more people and a car to the right, but I don't think I will paint them. Probably will have only highlights on the roofs, heads and shoulders, but I'm gonna do a full silhouette at this stage. I think I'm gonna add a few windows to the left hand side building, because it just looks a little too empty. 1, 2, and maybe another one just below that. And the sketch is finished, so let's paint. I didn't prewet the back of the paper, so I'm just going to spray the surface of the paper instead. Not much water though, just a very fine mist all over the paper. For my first wash I will be using a Skoda Aquario Gold number 18, but any large mop style brush will do the job. Okay, I'm going to start with a light value coffee consistency mixture, so there is lots of water on my brush and on the palette and not too much paint. I'm going to use only 3 colors today: neutral tint, Payne's Grey and Burnt Sienna, and also a little bit of liquid charcoal, and this is purely for the texture, and I'm not going to use liquid charcoal for my first wash. I will only need it for the darkest darks, where we need to make the darks look more interesting, so basically only for the texture. Okay, quite happy with this. Good tone, good value, exactly what we needed, so let's continue with this. So this is the sky and the side of the building on the left. Try to use as little brush strokes as possible. This will make your wash look cleaner. It looks like the surface of the paper is drying quite quickly, so I'm going to respray it again, because I really want some of the edges be soft. Not everything, not everywhere, so just a few more sprays in a few different areas. Yeah, that's better. That's quite good. As for the tonal paintings that Alvaro and Amanda do, they always start with basic shapes and add complexity later if necessary. In order to do so, every time you do a brush mark, you need to squint your eyes at the scene, think of the shape the stone is, and then repeat the shape with minimal brush strokes. If you see a dark shape on top of the light, don't worry about the dark at the moment, just focus on the lighter one. Another important thing is not to be repetitive. For example, if you look at the top row of windows, none of the windows are repeating each other. They all look different. To achieve it, I actually do the same brush stroke, but I use different amount of pressure on the brush or different speed of the stroke. Another option is to use a different part of the brush. You can do a sideways motion like that, and it leaves again different mark. It's almost like a corner of the window only. And or sometimes you can use just the tip of the brush like that, and it's much finer mark. When you use the tip of the brush actually, and when it leaves the finer mark, you have to be quite careful with this, because sometimes it might look a bit fidgety in comparison to when you use a full brush. Also, you can combine the tip and the full brush. For example, you can use the tip of the brush for the top part of the window where you might need more control, and then finish the mark with full brush stroke. Okay, I think that's enough for this part of building, so let's add windows to the left, gray out the right part of the painting, right edge. Not much happening here. I can't even see what's actually happening there because there is nothing on the photo. We don't have that part of the photo there. And I'm going to spray the bottom part for the even wash. Pick up all this gray of the palette and just going to paint this over. I'm thinking about if I need to leave any white spots, but I don't think so because all of these will be quite dark. So I'm grabbing tissue just to do wash out like that, and this is for the light coming through. It's probably a bit too high, but I'm just gonna leave it like that. Doesn't matter. If I don't like it, I can always paint over with a darker value. And there is a shadow on the left, again softening it with the tissue. I think we might need to do the bottom part of the painting darker, but let's add actually more light. So grabbing the tissue again, a bit more like that. Yeah, that's better. Much happy with that. Good. Okay, let's prepare a darker mixture. Probably I'd say 1 or 2 steps darker, so it's almost a beginning of middle value range. Okay, let's prepare the mixture. So we need a coffee consistency, approximately value 5 mixture, and I used a neutral tint and burnt sienna, and I don't think that's enough. I don't think it's dark enough, so let's add more neutral tint, burnt sienna and Payne's gray. Okay, let's test this. No, it's a bit too cool, so let's add more burnt sienna. Yep, that's better. Much happier with that. Let's grab some more. At this point, I'm actually trying to be a bit more careful around these shapes, around the cars and the people. So I'm trying to preserve some whites for the roofs. Don't need anything else actually. And a few highlights for the people on the sides and on the hands. And while this is still wet, let's use the tissue for the washout, like that. And we need to quickly continue painting because we don't really want any hard edges in between the shapes. So let's be quite quick with our brush marks. Again, careful around some highlights on the cars. And when I actually paint the cars, for example, I leave a highlight and I quickly assess if I like that highlight, if I like that part to be white. If I don't, I just paint over. Again, I'm doing the washout with the tissue just to suggest the light. So basically every time I leave the white of the paper, I assess if I like it or not, and if I don't, I paint it over. And as you can see, the lighter wash is still wet. I'm quite pleased with that. So we can seamlessly connect the lighter wash with the darker wash. Okay, this is done, and I need to sort out the light coming from the left, grabbing the tissue again, and going to do a washout across these cars like that. I'm quite rough actually when I do this, otherwise we won't remove enough paint. Okay, let's quickly paint the very foreground like that. We don't really need to leave any whites over here, so quickly painting this over. And again, because we have this sharp edge, we will need tissue. We need to grab the tissue and do wash out. Okay, wonderful, that's good. Okay, the first wash is done. I'm going to quickly dry this, and then we will proceed to the middle value and dark value second wash. The second wash. This is actually the hardest. So just to simplify my life, I will be holding these two brushes in my hands so I can switch quicker between them. This is a Skoda Aquarium number 14 and Neve Master Point number 10. And also I will have this brush to add more water on the paper during the washes. I will show you why when I do this. So let's start with the Skoda Aquarium mop brush. It's too much water on the palette, so let's remove that because we will need a very thick and dark mixture, and continue with our puddle. I'm using the same colors, neutral tint, Payne's Grey and Burnt Sienna. I'm going to add liquid charcoal to the mix purely for the texture. This is liquid charcoal. You don't have to do it because I'm purely adding it for the texture. I'm not adding it for the darkness or for the tone or anything else. If you have a granulating medium, you can add granulating medium as well. But in reality, you don't have to add any of this. Okay, I'm changing the brush to add little details on top of the balcony. And let's go back to the mop brush and continue with the big wash, because we don't really want the sharp edges to form. We need to be quite brave with the brush marks that we do at this stage. The only thing that we need to be concerned is leaving some white of the paper for the highlights on the people, for example, and on the cars, but the rest we don't really have to be too careful. Spray the area where the light will be for the soft edge, and because we don't really want that sharp edge that we have at the moment to get dry, we will need to use tissue later to soften that edge. So currently I'm trying to leave a few highlights here and there for the people and for the car, maybe the window as well, back window. I'm going to leave it just at this point. If I don't like it, I can always paint it over. So we have to be quite brave again with the moves like that. And let's fill the rest of the area, just a few shadows across. Let's fill this area. Yep, and the cars, leaving the window again, just a little shadow under the roof, and again back of the car, and the people. Again, while everything is still wet, I can see that actually it's drying quite quickly. I'm going to grab a tissue and soften it like that. Yep, that's good. Now I'm changing the brush to Alvaro's brush and grabbing lots of water and charcoal, adding charcoal as well, and adding this more water. I need more water and charcoal. Yeah, that's better. And adding this wash, very weak wash on top of that black, and this water will run down, and as it runs down it will create a very nice texture. I'm going to spray it like that, just to help it to move quicker. Now let's move to the left side of the painting and repeat the process. So everything that is in shadow, I'm going to paint with this dark mixture. I'm squinting my eyes basically at the photograph, and everything that is dark, I'm painting with this darker mixture. Like that. I left a little highlight for the person and for the car, and everything else will be in shadow. I'm not happy with the darkness of the cars that are in that beam of light, so I'm going to paint them over again. So I'm just going to change the brush to smaller mop. This is Alvarez number 2 mop brush. Just going to grab. It already had quite a bit of pigment on it, so I added a little bit more water and charcoal, and I'm painting over these cars, basically glazing them. And maybe less water, more paint for these two guys, for the people. So this is a mix of neutral tint, paints gray and burnt sienna, because charcoal doesn't add too much darkness. So that it adds darkness, but not as dark as I want it to be. Now I'm painting the people. And that's the roof of the car, slightly darker. It's gonna use a fingernail. Back to the second person. It's quite important to get the posture of these people correct, so they are in the focal point and we don't really want them to look odd. Okay, the back of that car slightly darker, and the roof. This is the focal point. This is where we want the most of the contrast to happen. So that's why I'm adding the darkness to this area. Yeah, I don't really like that light on the back window. Okay. We need to add darkness to that car in the corner as well. Slightly more pigment, thicker mixture. This is a very thick mixture. I would say it's probably even 80 to 20 pigment to water ratio. Okay, that's the car. Okay, let's revive that beam of light again. So sprayed the area, and now we're gonna grab the tissue, and that's that. And maybe one more. Okay, that's better. And don't worry about the roughness, how it looks at the moment, because watercolor and water will do its job. It will be softened, everything will be softened by itself. And if it's not, we can always spray it with a little bit of spray bottle, and it will add the moisture, and it will help the pigment move on the paper, and it will soften the edges. Now I'm going to paint the shadow on the left hand side, and it's very important that it's soft, so let's spray the area and paint wet on wet with a very light and watery mixture. I'm going to spray this again just to make sure that the edge is soft. Okay, and this is done, and I'm actually thinking to spray this entire area. Just gonna finish that. And I'm thinking to spray this entire area just to make sure we have all these soft edges happening. Okay, the bottom part of the painting is pretty much done, so I changed the brush to fully synthetic medium size round brush. This is NIF number 10, and I'm going to paint the darker shadows. And the most important part here, again, not to be repetitive, not to do too many sharp edges, so mostly I will be doing dry brush marks with a thicker mixture. I've noticed that there is a little runoff into the foreground, and also the foreground is a bit too light, so I'm just going to paint this over. It's not fully wet, but it's quite damp, so it's definitely okay to paint it over again. I'm going to use tissue to soften that edge again. Okay, quite happy with that. So let's go back to the synthetic brush and continue adding the darker shadows to the windows, columns and things like that, to the top part of the building. The most important part here is to observe the thickness of the mixture you're using, because mostly we will need the dry brush marks. So it would be good if you don't use too much water in your mixture. But also don't forget to use the appropriate amount of pressure when you do these marks, because if you first of all, you need to vary the amount of pressure you put on the brush, because if you use always the same amount of pressure, the marks will look the same, and we need the variety. We definitely need the variety in the painting. So try to vary how much pressure you use, because even if you don't have enough moisture, but you push your brush quite hard against the paper, it will leave almost a sharp-edged mark. But at the same time, if you lightly brush it against the surface and you have lots of water on your brush, it will still leave the dry brush mark. Okay, this is a bigger shape, so I'm going to change the brush, pick up whatever I have on the palette and try to do one brush mark. It's not really happening, but that's okay. It's actually okay. It's making these different lines. I'm probably gonna change the brush back to a smaller one and finish it on the on right hand side. Yep, that's better. That's good. Smudge it with my finger so it's a much rougher edge. And let's continue with the pillars, with the columns, and a few windows in between the columns. When there are a lot of details in a big space, I try to also move sporadically in between the places. So for example, I can paint a few windows on the bottom right corner and then jump into the right hand side of the building or on the top side of the building. So when I do it randomly, it also helps me with the variety of marks that I do. Another thing that you can actually do is to, when you prepare your mixture, you can squish the brush against the palette and it will flatten it. It will almost look like a flat brush, like that, and you can do corners, long lines, basically use like a flat brush. It definitely helps with making straighter lines. For example, if I want to do a column and something like that, it makes it straighter. Okay, I'm running out of pigment, so let's add more water and more pigment into the mix. Neutral tint, Payne's Grey, Burnt Sienna, a bit of charcoal, just for the texture. Not too much. Okay, yep, that's better. Softening it with my finger. Okay, quite happy with that. So I'm thinking where to move now. Okay, let's do this. These details again. When there is a long line, I don't paint it as a long straight line. I try to do shorter marks that would represent a long detail. These shadows are quite dark, so I'm pressing much harder against the surface and it looks much darker if you even compare it to the previous window that we did, because I didn't grab any more paint, but it looks much darker. And these two windows as well. Okay, that's good. Okay, the bottom part of the painting is getting dry and I don't really want it to, so I'm going to spray it again because we will be painting a few more details in there. So just a bit more water to this area to keep it wet for longer. Okay, going back to the synthetic brush and continue with all these windows and little details. I don't think we need to add too much more, just to these windows in the center. I think we need a stronger bottom shadow, so let's add more value to that. Okay, that's better. And let's move it across a little bit, like that. A few more details over here. And on this side as well. Okay, that's good. That's quite good. Okay, the bottom part of the painting, the darker part, is too uniform. The value of the dark is pretty much the same all over, so I'm going to add value 10. This is almost pure pigment, there is no water on my brush, and I'm going to paint the smaller shapes such as cars and people with this value, but not entire shape. Maybe for the people it will be entire shape. We'll have a look. Yeah, I think it's good if we paint entire shape. And for the cars, just probably the back side of the car, maybe under the window, just a little dash under the roof, like that. Maybe corner of the car over here, and the tire, and tires here as well. Okay, that's good. Okay, we added the darker value. Now we want to add the lighter value, and the only way I can add the lighter value is to remove the paint. So I'm going to grab the tissue and do a few washouts with the tissue. Okay, so let's do the back of the car, like that. Yeah, that's good. And also it creates soft edge, which is perfect. The side of the people, maybe side of that, back side of that car. Okay, I think that's done. Happy with that. And now let's add pure white highlights. Okay, that's good. Smudge it with my finger because we don't really want it to be too sharp. There is still damp, so it will be softish. The edges will be sort of soft anyway. Given the light on this car, yeah, that's quite good. Highlights on the shoulders. What else? On the heads. Trying to be quite careful with that. Not too much white. And the building, I'm not sure if I like that, so let's smudge that. Yeah, that's better. On that person, like that, a bit too rough. Yep, that's better. And there was another person over here, but very gently, because we don't really want to repeat that shape. Okay, I think that's good. Okay, I'm quite happy with this at this point. I don't think it needs too many more details, just maybe a few marks like that. If I'm not happy with this, if when I when I dry the painting and when I finish all the details and everything. And if I feel like it's not enough, I can always add more. But at this point, I don't really want to overwork it. I don't really want to add too many little details. So I'm just gonna probably leave the darker part of the painting as is and work on the left. Left is good, right side of the painting, where that building that we can't really see on the picture. I need to probably think about something, and it definitely needs to be darker than the left hand side, so we have to invent something there. Okay, the last bit that I really want to do is a bit of a shine on the over here on the center part of that balcony. A bit more. Yeah, that's good. Maybe smudge it with my finger a bit more. Okay, that's good. Let's try this because I don't really want it to move anymore. So I'm going to dry this and continue with the right hand side of the painting. Okay, this is dry, so now I'm grabbing my Neve Elver Castagne number 2 brush. This is quite dry, the mix is quite dry, and I'm going to do the dry brush technique here. I'm going to start with indicating the levels, so we will have approximately 3 levels. I'm not sure if it's dark enough just to add the windows, because this corner needs a bit of darkness. It should be somewhere in between. Yep, I think that's good. I'll probably do something like that, because this corner needs to be somewhere in between the middle and dark value, but not fully dark. Yeah, I quite like that. Actually, it's a little bit too rough, so I may use the tissue to soften some of the edges actually. It needs a stronger connection at the top, so let's do maybe let's do this. Yep, that's better. And maybe a few darker lines like that somewhere in the center. Yep, that's good. Okay, so let's use the tissue. I'm going to grab the tissue and soften the, maybe something like that. Okay, that's good. Happy with that. Now is the fun part, the details. I'm grabbing Neve Elver Castagne number 8 brush, and you need a approximately value 8 mixture, but it's supposed to be milk consistency, somewhere in between milk and cream consistency. It's actually really hard to pick up any water with this brush because it's so thin. Same colors: burnt sienna, neutral tint, Payne's gray, and I'm going to start with public lights. So very quick, one single brush stroke. Not thick enough. It's supposed to be one single line, but it's not thick enough, so I added a few more brush strokes to it. When it's a dry brush mark, it's actually much easier to add a few brush strokes. If it was a sharp-edged line and you try to correct it, it would be a disaster, but because this is a dry brush mark, it's already not perfect, so when you add in another dry brush mark, it connects very nicely. Now the wires, all this electricity lines go in different directions. I quite like adding public lights and electricity cables to the scenes like that. They create beautiful connections and add a sense of distance and dimension in the painting, particularly to these scenes like that where there is not much depth anyway. As soon as I added this pole, I can feel the space between me and the building. It's just magical. I cannot describe it in better words. I'm adding another pole to the right hand side, but there will be no similar effect because there is not much difference in between the values. So the pole is quite dark and the background is quite dark. So that's why we are not getting the same result, but it's absolutely fine. We're still getting the connections between the values and between the shapes. And as soon as I add a little bit of white gouache to that pole on the right hand side, there will be much better sense of depth. And I think we're pretty much done with all these little bits and pieces, and I think we need to add a bit of white. So let's start with the pole first. I'm gonna cross the colors. What else? Just little bits of white everywhere. Let's add a little bit of white under the balcony, few little highlights like that. Maybe a few highlights on these electricity connections and at the top of the pole to the light. And maybe just a few white little dots all around the building. Just a few highlights. I think we need a few stronger ones. Yeah, that's better. Maybe somewhere here as well, just to, so it's not only one. Yeah, let's leave it like that. I think the one on the corner is a bit too strong. I'm gonna smudge it with the finger. Okay, that's better. I'm just going to go all around the painting and add the highlights here and there. And please don't feel like you have to repeat every brush stroke I do. Little things like that will not make much difference. As long as you got the proportions and perspective correct, you've got a good contrast between the darkest area and the lightest area. Your washes are clean. You have lost and found edges. No obvious repetition in shapes. What else? Pretty much that's it. Then your painting should be all good. And I think I'm going to finish this painting on this note. I feel like the entrance to the theater area is too plain, but I'm going to sign it anyway, remove the tape and go have a cup of tea. If I still feel the same way when I come back, I may add a few details to that area. Maybe night lights and theater name, I don't know, something like that. Anyway, no matter what, even at this point, I'm very happy with the painting. Hope you enjoyed it too, and if you want me to do another monochrome painting, please let me know and I'll think of something else. Until my next video, bye.